I'm actually pretty excited for today's conversation because you guys are a lot of fun. And also, conspiracy theories and why people believe them are actually, this is one of my favorite things to explore just because it seems so ridiculous, but there are kind of concrete scientific reasons why our brains do stuff that is kooky. First, though, I found it interesting. You guys kick off the book by noting that the United States was founded by a conspiracy that, of course, turned out to be true. And I'm wondering if you think that this history plays any role in Americans' willingness to believe in, frankly, ridiculous conspiracies as well, because it's like this is in our DNA as Americans.
Yeah, I mean, I would say 100%, Jordan. That's a huge part of it. There's another part of the first, like the opening foray of the book, wherein we had to cut this, but we talk about the number one conspiracy that many children learn in the United States. It's the first conspiracy theory that you ever get introduced to. It's the idea of Santa Claus, right? Obey these social mores so that this large man can break into your house and leave you stuff. And every adult is in on it. You know, it's a huge violation of taboo and normalcy to be that adult who tells a kid, you know, exposes the whole thing to the kid. So everybody plays along, not because there's some overarching sinister plan or cabal, but because you don't want to ruin Christmas for children. And so I think when you see sort of the origin story of the United States and all the things that are taught about it, all the things that later come out as ugly truths, then it makes sense that people would have an inherent distrust of authority and official narratives, especially in this country.
Yeah, the idea that kids believing in Santa is a conspiracy is kind of funny. We tried Elf on the Shelf this year, and my son's like, do you know about this? Do you know about Elf on the Shelf? I didn't know about this. I guess it's a white people thing, and I just somehow that went way over. That skipped my house.
Well, it's the difference between omniscient surveillance, like with Santa Claus. He just somehow knows what you're doing, even when you're sleeping and all that, to a physical representation of a surveillance device that's in your house that knows all the shit you're doing.
Right. So it's like TikTok, but it's a figurine that sits on your mantle. We tried it, and my son, who's 3, was like, so he's alive and he talks to Santa Claus, but he's sitting on the shelf. And I'm like, oh yeah, at night he flies back to the North Pole. And then the next day he's in a different position or whatever. And he comes out and he goes, why isn't he moving? And I'm like, oh, well, he's magic. And he goes, okay, but why isn't he moving? And I thought, that's a valid question. I'm going to try to avoid that because there's no good answer. And then I go, well, he's sleeping. And he goes, but his eyes are open. And I'm like, I don't have the mental capacity to argue with you about this because you are right on all counts. So I eventually told my 3-year-old son, this is just a game that we're playing. He's just a plastic doll and it's fun. So we can pretend that it's real, but we know that he's really not real. And he's like, oh. And it was still fun. It was fine. Maybe he lost a little bit of the magic, but he didn't really care. And his baby sister, who at the time wasn't even 1 year old, or was about 1 year old, he's like, this is real. He flies to the North Pole. So he was in on it, and it was just as fun for him to tell his little sister who doesn't even understand what's going on.
Well, but stories are fun to tell, right? Yeah,
it's fun to tell, but I don't know. Maybe I'm the adult who screws up Christmas for everybody because when the kid's like, Santa doesn't, how is this possible? He goes to every house. And how come some kids get bad toys even though they're good kids? And I'm like, Santa's fake and it's all us buying your stuff. And some parents have more money than others. That's the truth. Don't tell your friends. Because, you know, why did the kid next door who lives with his grandparents who are retired not get a bunch of crap? And he did. He's not a bad boy. His parents they live on Social Security, right? And we don't. So, like, it's almost a harmful narrative to tell kids that Santa brings good children more stuff than others, because when one kid gets $1,000 whatever thing for Christmas and the other kid gets a handmade craft from grandma, it's like, well, what did I do?
Yeah.
Why did I get on? How the hell did I get on this subject?
We're basing it on moral stuff that the kid did, right? Like morality checks and balances, basically, and choices that they make. So then you're tying whether they're good or not, to whether their parents are wealthy or not.
And
So
whether
it's just
they,
like,
and also tying the idea of success to the accumulation of material goods. It's like, listen, kid, I'm just going to break it down with you. That neighbor
Yeah.
may seem cool, but he's into some really dark shit. And that's the reason why all his action figures are off brand.
Right. He got Mega Blocks instead of Legos because when you're not there, he lights other people's houses on fire. That's the truth. I'm sorry.
Can we get back just to the original question, Jordan? Just
That's probably a good idea.
The
Yeah.
American conspiracy, right? Or the conspiracy that became America. I think it has a lot to do with young minds, because if you think about it, at least in my experience, and I think for a lot of American kids, you experience the founding fathers for the first time. You learn about them for the first time really young. And it is almost, I don't know, some kind of fable that you get taught, a version of the story that is a fable. If you think about the cherry tree and all those things that you learn.
I cannot tell a lie.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you probably told some lies and probably owned some slaves too, but let's not, there's a lot of things you've done wrong.
Some of your fake teeth were from enslaved people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oof. Wait, is that true?
That is true.
I thought he had wooden dentures. Oh God, that's gross. They pulled other people's teeth out and they gave them to. Oh God, do I want to go? Do I want to know?
Okay, so look, don't think about it too much. But if you encounter at that early age in that version, it's what Ben was saying. We become disillusioned as we grow older and we start to fill in those full stories. And I think that happens to us over and over again, especially if you grow up in a very religious family, no matter what religion that is. As you start to, it's a simpler version. It's a fable version for you for a long time until you start to learn more and more details. And as that complexity increases, the reality starts to change a lot.
Yeah, that's so interesting because, of course, the idea of the founding father, any sort of thing that gets mythologized, fableized, is always going to look black and white, and of course nothing ever is. Is the dentures thing true? I remember learning like, oh, he had wooden dentures, and I'm like, that's a weird detail, and it turns out that it's just way more horrifying than that. Is that true?
It is true that that George Washington was at least in one purchase of teeth from enslaved human beings. Also, it was way more common to have false teeth that were made from like hippopotamus bones and
okay, well, that's less. It's kind of like
weird. It's less bad.
Way less horrifying. Way less.
Yeah, but these stories, like these examples are true, and of course, if one looks back at if we're trying to understand how someone could slowly fall into off a cognitive chasm into something crazy like Pizzagate, right? Or something easily disprovable like the claims of QAnon fame, then I think you're very correct in that we have to start with an understanding of the things that led us from history to the present day. And the sad fact of the matter is that whether you're talking about Smedley Butler or whether you're talking about some of the things the founding fathers did, what you're going to find is that some things that would have been dismissed as conspiracy theories even before that word existed were absolutely true. They were real conspiracies, and it takes a dollop of critical thinking to avoid saying, look, if one thing was proven to be true, then shouldn't everything else be proven true? Like conspiracy theory as a concept, it's been weaponized into a thought terminating cliche. That's why you'll see a lot of places like if you want to dismiss something, right now, conspiracy theory is a pejorative term. It's used to make it sound like the idea that Queen Elizabeth is a half human, half alien creature with all these weird hobbies, to make that sound as though it is on the same level of saying, certain banks ran money for drug cartels. It's tremendously reductive and dismissive because one of those things is absolutely true. And that's kind of a line that we try to explore here. And we went back and forth in the book in any project that we do where we say, all right, what is our intellectual responsibility to our audience? And that's something that maybe sounds a little highfalutin, but it's a question you have to ask yourself. And honestly, it's a question some textbook writers of the past should have asked themselves.
I agree, and I think highfalutin or not. I like that you said highfalutin instead of highfalutin. By the way, I've never actually heard anybody put the G on the end. The idea that we have a responsibility as say podcasters, and I don't want to go too far down this road, this sort of like self-congratulatory role, but I agree with that. I think people are dedicating potentially hours per week listening to us. The least we can do is be like, is this thing that I said or that a guest said on the show based in any kind of rational thinking? Is there any sort of evidence? I'd like to talk about why a conspiracy theory isn't the same as a theory that is based in science. I think that's the difference that, one, a lot of people online certainly don't seem to understand. And two, the word theory is so broad that you can say, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory. But if you say theory of relativity, no one's like, theory of relativity. I mean, that's just a theory.
Well, okay, let's talk about some of the similarities, because there are some. A conspiracy theory is often formed by creating an hypothesis. And right, so you're putting together a couple of different puzzle pieces that you, as the person creating the theory, have identified as being connected in some way. And you are making those connections. That's really what that theory is. And when you're creating a hypothesis for, some kind of scientific research, you are coming up with the potential answer, right? This is potentially the answer to the bigger question of why does gravity function the way that it does? Something simple like that, right? So simple, gravity. It's not. But like you create that thing, and then with the scientific method, you test it, and that's the whole point. And you test it until it fails. Right. And when it fails, you change one of the variables and you test it again, and you keep testing. With a theory, a conspiracy theory, there is really no concrete way to test it, because you're often trying to in some way prove a negative, which is either impossible, or you aren't ever going to get the information that you would need to confirm that theory. And it's almost impossible, I would say.
Can you give an example of that? Because the guy who the Pizzagate guy who you mentioned earlier, for those who don't know, that was where they thought this pizzeria in Washington, D.C. had a secret basement, and there were children trapped in there, and I think it was Hillary Clinton / Democrats were drinking the kids' blood to stay young, which is a ridiculously dumb thing to believe. And it turned out this place didn't have a basement at all. And the way this guy tested the hypothesis was he ran in there with a rifle to try to rescue the kids. And as dumb as he was, I kind of, he wanted to be a hero, and thought he was doing this noble thing, and he tested the hypothesis, and now he's in prison.
Yeah, maybe we start there. One of the more, and I don't want to oversimplify, but one of the ways to think of it, when you're asking about the difference between a scientific theory and a conspiracy theory, we're kind of talking about inductive v. deductive reasoning. Right? Like Matt was saying, scientific theory, you're testing existing things, right? And with this person, if we kind of game out what happened cognitively to them, they started including a bunch of other stuff based on their previously existing beliefs, their confirmation bias, right? So one person doesn't like Hillary Clinton. And, unfortunately, there are any number of valid reasons to dislike any number of politicians.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Building on that, this guy's already primed to find negative information. I'm not using a scientific way, like, critical information about the person, find it more believable. Right. So if you already don't like someone, then when you hear something bad about them, your brain just kind of wants to toss that on the pile of reasons you were right. And then this gets rewarded in sort of the dopamine cycle, the addiction cycle of social media. Right. I said this, 50 something people liked it. So I must be on to something. Right. And then this sort of snowballs, right? It escalates into a series of if-thens that are increasingly less examined. Because now what happens is something that you thought could make sense because you don't like a person, an entity, an institution, or whatever. Along the way, as you accept more and more out there claims, the stuff that you started with just starts to slide into the realm of fact in your perspective. And so this guy, look, the other thing is, Jordan, most people, given a safe space to digest information and given the opportunity to learn, most people are incredibly intelligent when they have that opportunity, that space to process. And that space to process is just increasingly elusive in these days, you know?
Oh, Ben, I agree with everything you're saying there. I just want to give some more context to that, the Pizzagate example, right? So you've got one guy who reads about this theory online. You can read a ton about it because there was so much speculation on the internet at the time, considering surrounding the email situation, the Podesta situation, all of those things. He read about all that stuff.
There were leaked emails from WikiLeaks that showed them talking about bringing pizzas, and people were like, "That means child pornography," and it's so they're getting the pizzas from. I think it was called Comet Pizza or something like that.
Comet Ping Pong. The connection was made from John Podesta to the owner of that Comet Ping Pong and pizza place. And then there was some connection there. I remember reading about that. And then it kind of went down the rabbit hole from there. Like, stuff was glommed on to the theory, right? Well, maybe this is where they keep the kids. Well, maybe there's this hidden subway tunnel system that takes them over to the other parts of Washington. Well, maybe there's all this. And that's all part of the conspiracy storytelling that goes on as one of these things is forming. And it really just continues on. The reason why that guy was testing the theory, and it's true, that's what he was doing. Well, I'm going to go there and do that. The reason why it doesn't stop the theory from proliferating or growing is because you can add parts of new parts to the story. Well, maybe they boarded up the part where it used to have access to the tunnel that was down there. Well, they knew the heat was on, so they shut down the operation there and moved it somewhere else. You know what I mean? Like you can just add stuff to it if you're on a message board, if you're talking about something like that.
It's collaborative stealth storytelling, and the absence of proof can function as proof all its own if portrayed in the right spin. So there's a lot of, I mean, there are some weird Orwellian aspects to this, but I think to the point about mixing and matching, like conspiracy theories in the modern day proliferating in modern communication channels, it's kind of like going to Chipotle. You're getting a burrito, but you can add your own lettuce. You could get the, I don't know if they do guac on request. It's not important for this comparison, but I am curious.
You don't know if Chipotle does guac on request.
Bro.
Have you just, what? How do you not know that?
I've never gone into the breach there. I'm always in such a
Good
hurry.
Lord.
So
Guy doesn't know Chipotle has guac for $2?
I know. I've destroyed all my credibility.
Get the fuck out of here.
To be fair, Ben's always ordering the quesadilla. Yeah, it's a whole
which is off menu. You
that
can have some juice
is
for it.
ridiculous.
Yeah, it is indeed.
I thought we were friends. Anyway,
But
continue.
the point is the what we're really looking at. Another way to conceive of this is what I would call this is like high-speed collaborative folklore. Is what's happening, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's crowdsourced, right? And it has all the juicy bits of scary stories to tell in the dark, and it has all of the confirmation, the scratch behind the ears of feeling one belongs or has an identity within a community or tribal system. So it's reinforced in several powerful ways. And this happened way before conspiracy theory became a modernized term. This happens with doomsday cults as well. Whenever the leader gets the date wrong, the leader or someone else can always come in and say, "Oh, also this is why." Everybody stay in the cult. But this is why.
Right. Everyone stay in the cult. The reason the spaceship didn't pick us up was because we had metal in our underwire, in our bras, and in our pants. And they said no metal. And we took off all the metal, but we forgot that there's metal in the underwire, in the bra. That was a real example, by the way, from, was that in your book or was that in a different book? That particular comet death cult?
That's a different, yeah. Are you talking about Heaven's Gate? They would be the most famous one. I don't know
if that's Heaven's Gate. I think that's the one, or I'm starting to even get them confused. That one of the leaders was Doe, right? Do you remember this?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I do. I do remember this. And also, how strange is it that now we're saying, yeah, which doomsday
Which
cult
death cult with the comet was that? Because there were multiple death cults with multiple comets that had spaceships involved. Yeah, exactly. That's where we're at.
It takes us to interesting, challenging places, especially when you have to go back and take a hard look, like you interrogate history, right? And sometimes quite recent history. And you have to say, well, this thing that was dismissed, right, or called, a crackpot narrative, it turned out to be true. And, again, to your point about the lack of nuance, often this stuff is not 100% true. And on the flip side, a lot of times, at least in history, it's not 100% false either. There's often, Matt, you and I always like to talk about this, and Noel as well. There's often some germ, some grain, some origin point that was true, and that informed the growth of the folklore, the embellishment around it.
So a lot of conspiracy theories do have a basis in fact, but then people continue to connect dots that just aren't there. I think you kind of mentioned this before. People follow, they make connections in their brain, and I'm trying to think of an example, but chemtrails is probably a good example. We did an episode of Skeptical Sunday about this, episode 660, and people would say, those are chemtrails, not just airline condensation, and the reason is this, and this. And since they're looking for a conclusion, they'll say, like, look, people who are over this area, they get sick more. And it's like, well, did you look at any other area to compare? No, we just looked at the area where we wanted to find sick people, and look, we found all these sick people. And it's like, okay, but then you went to this other area where there's no people at all, and you found less sick people. Why would that be? Well, one's a city and one is a rural area that has no people in it, and one's near an airport that has 1 million planes. So, of course, you say, look, there's more sick people where there's more planes. Okay, but you didn't control for any of the other variables, so it's not really useful. And that's a generous interpretation of people connecting dots that aren't there. A lot of people just make up the friggin' dots in the first place, like Pizzagate.
Yeah, but if you look at our book and we talk about some of the experimentation and spraying in the air, aerosol sprays that the U.S. government has tested out, both on the populace of the United States when we've been engaged in hot war in places like Vietnam, like just doing tons of testing, spraying stuff in the air, just like the way chemtrails are described by, someone who would believe that conspiracy theory. And that's, I think, the germ of truth at the center of that. And a lot of it is stuff that we didn't know for years. Ben, was it the St. Louis spraying in a couple low-income areas?
Operation Large Area Coverage, I believe that was one of the names. That was this is one of a series of tests that the U.S. government conducted specifically over economically disadvantaged populations, and their idea was that this would be kind of a war game. This is practice. This is experimentation. What we're trying to learn here is how a foreign power's biological weapons attacks could spread over the continent. And they checked a bunch of safeguards, or at least to their, to their standard of safe. And they said, look, we don't think this is actually going to hurt people, so it'll help us learn how this stuff spreads. Of course, it went everywhere because they didn't really factor in like the wind patterns. Right. So.
Oh, yeah. I can understand not knowing that wind exists when you're a scientist.
Right. Exactly.
For the military.
And
well, it was a test, right? They were trying to see what would happen, and they wanted to understand how wind would affect it, how temperature would affect it.
Yeah. And if it's so safe, then this is one of the questions we have. If it's so safe, then why are they only testing in poor areas where people
sprayed over Beverly Hills, California?
Right.
If
Put
it's
it
so
over
safe.
Beverly Hills, and why are they also not telling the public?
Yeah. Super secret.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff, you could see how maybe somebody grows up in St. Louis and maybe they hear these stories, right? And maybe like many people, they correctly or incorrectly attribute later health issues to something like this. Then of course that becomes part of this hidden lore, right? And they keep their eye out for maybe congressional investigations that do or do not arrive. And then at some point they hear about chemtrails and they go, that's not too far off, actually, from what I know to be true. So I think that's a really solid example of how these things spread, because on some level, the very bare bones of the concept there is a factual basis. But the problem is that makes it really easy for someone else to come along, whether they're acting sincerely, whether they're just trolling, or whether they're even just trying to like spread propaganda for some other conspiracy. It makes it very easy for them to say, look at example A. Now reassess example B. And even if example B is absolute hogwash, it can be very difficult to apply critical thinking to it in that case.
Right. So the argument that some conspiracy theories turn out to be true, no matter how ridiculous, MK Ultra, right, with the CIA using like psychedelics for mind control or whatever it was, and chemtrails where people were actually sprayed with something in a poor area, that, and then the government, of course, lying about that. So a lot of these theories, although it's ridiculous, there's a reason for believing them that's not just completely insane.
Oh yeah, but that doesn't mean you can't, go a little too far down your own rabbit hole, because ultimately it's a choose your own adventure in this thing, right? And when you're thinking about the information we encounter on a regular basis, you have to acknowledge, I think we all have to acknowledge, it has changed fundamentally in the course of 10 years, maybe 15 years, let's give it. The stuff that we encounter every day that so many people will just kind of take in and use either as a talking point with somebody that they're hanging out with, or as something they even take in as maybe a true fact that they just know that they can spout off when they're, I do this. I'm assuming we all do this to some extent. It's often unattributed information. It's often like this bite-sized, cherry-picked piece of information from a much larger story. It's often aimed at a specific bubble that you're probably in. And it's often conveyed to you by somebody who is not a subject matter expert, right? And
yeah,
like
it's called podcasting.
Or TikTok.
But that's just the world we live in now. That's how we get our information to a large part. Not all of us and not all information, but it's the information we swim in. And it's creepy to me.
It is, and we another classic example of something that sounds fake but turns out to be true is like these false flag attacks, right? Gulf of Tonkin, where the United States was like, let's LARP that Vietnam attacked us and then go invade, and it's like, oh, that turned out to be true, but then that evolved somehow into 9/11 was an inside job. Look at this detonation, and it's like, well, okay. You're crazy. Oh, wait, Gulf of Tonkin. Okay, so this has happened before where the United States pretends we get attacked by somebody. But this is different.
Yeah.
Right?
But if
and
you
it's
look
like, okay, but where's the nuance?
If you look at something like the Project for the New American Century, a think tank that in the year 2000 puts out a statement within their members and to other people that we need a new Pearl Harbor. We need a new Pearl Harbor. That is what they said verbatim. And it was because they needed more money to build more weapons, to make sure weapons manufacturing, like, the Northrop Grummans of the world and the Lockheed Martins of the world are still going to be functional and their stocks are going to be okay.
Wow.
I want to put in something important here that, because I appreciate the point about nuance. It is crucial. And we are talking about something that can be devilishly difficult, but we also have to realize that people are great explainers, right? The brain categorizes, and that's kind of the extreme end of that trait that has evolved to get people to where they are today. The extreme end of that creates patterns where none may exist. And
patternicity, I think, is what this is called, right? Where we connect dots even if they're not there. It's the age-old example of this is Russell in bushes is a predator, even when it's a bird or something. And so we're evolved to connect the dots and go, there's a rustle in the bushes, everybody run and get your weapons ready, or both. And so we've evolved that as a survival instinct, but we still do it where we say a confirmation bias pattern that happened to many people that I know is, and I'm sure you've seen this or heard about this. When you drive under a streetlight and it turns off? Has that happened to you?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of my friends growing up had noticed this, and they'd be like, I have a power over lights. that I don't know how to control. And it's like, no, you've observed solenoids or whatever overheating in street lamps and they turn off when you're near them, but you didn't notice the other 30,000 lights that did absolutely nothing when you drove underneath them because of patternicity and because of confirmation bias. So you have nothing but the ability to observe that sometimes lights turn off and you see that, which is literally everything with eyes in the whole universe.
Which is still great. That's a great power. It's just not the one you think you have. But this, this is something that I think, because human brains are hardwired to practice and engage in this phenomenon, in this activity, then what we have to understand is there's realistically not a way to stop it. The best we can hope for is to channel it appropriately. And there's a great point that that our buddy Dan, I think it was Dan Harmon, Matt, who made this a while ago. He said, I love conspiracies because, the alternative is that there's no one in charge. And, and the world is just a bunch of people sort of kind of faking it till they make it. And that's, I think that's something that's quite alluring.
That's a deeper point, right? That's a deeper point because I've noticed this, and I was going to bring this up, that a lot of people that believe in this stuff, the more ridiculous theories, I should say, I can't help but notice that a lot of them, their lives are spinning out of control. Like maybe they lost their job recently or they've got issues, health issues. And instead of going, holy crap, no, there's nobody that can control things. We're just one text message looking at my phone while crossing the street away from death at any given moment. The economy, anything could happen. I might lose my home. My kids, something might happen to them. It's better to be like, there's a cabal of people that are really steering everything and they're evil and they're the enemy. Let's focus on that rather than anything could happen to me at any time and there's nothing I could do about it.
Yeah, rather than
it's far scarier.
Rather than it's my fault.
Or that it's your own fault, right? But it's better to believe that somebody is steering the ship rather than fate happens, and stuff happens to perfectly good people for any reason, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's actually more scary than there's an evil cabal out to get you, I think.
True, because you could join the cabal.
Right. You have a shot at making your way to the cabal, right, at some point, or avoiding it, right? Oh, I'm avoiding it by keeping a low profile. You're not going to fight nature. But conspiracy belief systems themselves have been around forever. I'm blood libel for, was it old Russia where they said Jews eat babies and then it's like ... Today we have QAnon saying Democrats eat babies and it keeps them young. It's just a shellacking on this multi-century old conspiracy theory. So not only are they undermining democracy, they're not even being original about it. Classic internet somehow. Are conspiracy theories becoming more prevalent, or does it just seem that way because of the internet?
Ooh, that's a really good question, Jordan. We used to talk a lot about zines. The things you'd find like in the basement of your bookstore or a library or something like that.
Photocopied underground music punk band brochure.
Underground publishing scene. That was really the way that I'm aware conspiracies proliferated for a while until you got message boards, like the early message boards where it could happen on there. Then, and that's just where you can find a group of people who kind of, at least in some way, agree with what you're talking about and your ideas, right? And then it becomes the very tribal, small thing early on with the zines, grows a little bit with the message boards. And now when you've got full-blown social media, everybody is just, there are a lot of people who are willing to at least explore the ideas further. And that's where you get the palimpsest thing, where you get the glomming on thing, where folklore really takes off, is when you have enough people contributing enough stuff and ideas onto that, core.
Yeah, okay, so the earlier point, are humans, given the opportunity, are humans quite intelligent? Yeah. Are humans quite original? Nah. There's a reason why UFO abduction stories are beat for beat the same as fairy tales about changelings, right? About Rip Van Winkle is an alien abduction story. They just mad-libbed the terms in. So it is sadly not surprising to see some of those old tropes come back and be weaponized again, as they were against Jewish communities for, as you said, hundreds of years. And now, what I would say is also different here is that these ideas can be weaponized. To your point, Matt, about the ubiquitous nature of communication, they can be weaponized by bad faith actors quite effectively. Like there's proof that the so-called troll armies in Russia and the government, the government of China doesn't employ them, right? They're just patriotic dudes. They had some pretty successful campaigns spreading misinformation, disinformation. And if you asked some of the people there who were paid to spread these ideas in the US in particular, they probably didn't really care. They were at least agnostic about whether or not, insert person here was eating babies. They just knew it was their job to spread it around. And it's like, we talk sometimes about meta conspiracies, and maybe that's the difference today. Maybe that's one of the big differences. Now, like, as you got to this beautiful point, Jordan, where so many things, so many conspiracies that we find to be proven true are some faction of a government or powerful entity like a corporation messing up and then trying to cover it up, conspiring to cover up their original mistake. So these are not grand genius Illuminati types. They're, oh shit, I don't want to get in trouble types. And then so when you see that, that's a meta conspiracy. Another meta conspiracy example would be disinformation campaigns that are meant to spread and divide populations to one degree or another. So those things, unfortunately, do have some sand to them. It's hilarious to me and quite, sad, because I fell for this in my younger days as well, to be able to go on to these readily available sources of unverified information and say, well, I don't know. I was pretty busy today and I put a solid 2 hours into some YouTube videos, and I read the Wikipedia sources. So guys, I think I don't have a biology degree, but I formed some pretty solid opinions on chemtrails.
Hey, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There's a lot more just like this. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to the show. You touched on something that was quite interesting. Conspiracy theories fed by nation states like Russia and China, their whole concept of asymmetric warfare, because they can't, now especially we see with Russia, could never beat any Western country on the battlefield, really, or any large power, I should say, on the battlefield. China also certainly can't. You've got Russia with their Internet Research Agency plugging all this nonsense. We did an episode about that with Renee DiResta, especially regarding vaccines and other health issues. You mentioned the example from China. We call them Wumao, which is like 50-cent army is the translation. They actually use the same tactics on their own population to explain why their COVID policies failed, among other things. You can't have a normal discussion on the Chinese internet or WeChat because they'll either delete your account, your message, or they will just sort of mob you with people that are like, you're bad for thinking this. The real reason is this. And it's just people who are paid to post these things. Also did an episode about that with Laowai86 on paid Chinese and Russian propaganda on YouTube. But it's especially dangerous because people think they've come to conclusions, like you said, based on their own research. But really what they're doing is talking to people that have, in many cases, talking with people who say, I was there, I saw it with my own eyes. And it's like, no, you didn't. You're part of a group of 200 people that are posting this everywhere, along with a doctored photo or 10, to make it look like this is a real thing with a real set of people that swear they saw it. But it's a psychological operation. Speaking of conspiracy theories, the real conspiracy theory is the friends we made along the way, right? Because you've got 200 people who are pretending that this thing happened. A friend of mine got offered to post he got offered money to post a video that said COVID-19 came from the American white-tailed deer. And it was a Chinese agency that sent this to him and a lot of other YouTubers. And in fact, I got the same offer to do it on my channel. Hey, we'll give you, whatever, couple $1,000 if you post this video about how COVID-19 actually came from the United States. And the reason is because China didn't want to say, yeah, we know this came from us and we have lax standards at our biolabs or we eat bats or whatever it is. They wanted to whitewash this. And so they offered to pay YouTubers to post this video. It's crazy. And that's the real conspiracy, is that's really happening. That kind of thing, right?
Oh, well, what do you do with that kind of thing when you, Ben and I and Noel, we talked pretty recently about I think it's called the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, which it states that the United States can deploy propaganda against its own public now. And it's totally fine. It was repealing an older law that was in place that just said the United States can propagandize with Voice of America and other services, exterior to the United States, much in the same way the CIA is only really allowed to operate outside of the U.S. territories. In this case, it's saying the U.S. can propagandize its own people. And when you're trying to imagine and identify like what kinds of propaganda are headed my way, like that potential message that that if you were a different person, Jordan, maybe you needed that $1,000, maybe you would take it and make that video. And, and how many other versions of that are out there occurring right now with other messages that are either coming from like a state power like China or maybe even coming internally from the United States government, because there's some kind of message that they need to get out that somebody somewhere in some office believes would be helpful, either for a campaign or for, a fight against whatever unnamed, unknown thing like terrorism or drugs.
They just need to have Hollywood make a movie about it.
Inside the house.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Speaking of propaganda, have you guys seen the new Top Gun?
Right.
We have Hollywood for that, right? Man, it's going to get so much worse when we have widespread deep fake audio and video, because you're going to be able to show a video of Obama drinking blood with Macaulay Culkin, and you're going to think, I saw it with my own eyes in a video. What are you talking about? Nina Schick and I did an episode about that. I can't remember the episode number, but she was talking about deep fake audios on the way, deep fake videos on the way. She had a deep fake made of her, and it was basically her face over a porn actress, which is like the most obvious use of deep fake stuff, and that's only going to get worse. I've noticed a lot of the people who seem to believe in the more ridiculous theories, they seem to be undereducated, right? Lots of all caps, run-on sentences with no punctuation about chemtrails or whatever it is in my inbox. But what other factors are involved? Because it's not just education level, is it? I do see otherwise sane people also starting to indulge in this sort of thing. It's no longer just the Pakistani taxi driver in New York telling me no Jews died on 9/11, which really happened to me. And I was like, dude, why do you believe that? And he's like, Infowars.net or whatever. He was talking about Alex Jones stuff. Yeah. And I was like, whoever's telling you this has an agenda. They want you to believe it's not true. Like, I know people who are Jewish who died on 9/11. And he's like, really? And he was that guy was a moron, right? But there are other people that are otherwise normal, and they're like, yeah, the government might be putting things in the food or the water. I mean, we just don't know.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there are a couple. I mean, I want to be careful with some of this because we don't want to paint with a broad brush, right? And we don't want to make the mistake that some conspiracy theories make, where they get a little too absolutist with stuff. So yes, there does seem to be a trend toward it's the same way that higher education tends to make people a little bit more to the left at times in like a general way. Then you could correlate a bit of educational aptitude, or educational achievement. But to your point, which is beautifully made, there are also plenty of people who are doing very well in life, very well. And then they've got the one thing. They've got that one thing you talked to. Now, it's usually not going to be like flat Earth, right? When you get to the doctorates and so on, but they may have one thing, and they may have very strident opinions on that. I would say, I'm trying to recall some of the studies I read, but there was one thing that said people who are more likely to believe in what would be described as conspiracy theories also are more likely to believe in a higher sort of spiritual or supernatural power. So like a matter of faith. Now, the degree of that correlation, again, is tricky because, if you're not careful and nuanced about that, that gets to be a lot like saying if you believe in God, you are a conspiracy theorist, which is still
That's
kind
going to
of,
go over well.
yeah, that's third rail for a lot of people. You know?
Yeah.
But
It kind of, well, never mind.
I know,
That's a
I
different,
know.
yeah.
I know.
I was like, well, let's explore. Let's not do that one right now. That's a totally separate podcast that isn't even really what we talk about.
Yeah.
Can I just say, Jordan,
Yeah.
the things that people believe are, I mean, think about something that would just hit the news as we're recording today. And it's actually been talked about for months and months and months, for years in other countries, for decades. Something called potassium bromate, which is a food additive. And
That's funny. I saw that just the other day that we're putting something in bread that is illegal in Europe. We did an episode on banned foods on this show too, a Skeptical Sunday, and all these dyes we use. It's like, well, we don't use that in Europe. It's bad.
Yeah.
Well, it's our government institution, right? The FDA that goes through and tests these food additives and makes sure they're good to go for us humans at certain levels. And that's our stance. Like, the government stance is you can put pretty much anything in there as long as you test it and make sure it's okay, at the level you put it in there. That
Now,
has
let's
nothing
be
to do with.
reasonable. You can only have so many rat turds in the cereal.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
what's that called? The LD50, where like this amount of this can kill you. And for some things, it's really small, like ricin. And for other things, you're like, shouldn't that number be higher? It's like, this is how many Twizzlers you need to eat before you die.
Yeah.
On the spot.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that stuff's all real. And, it doesn't matter what your educational background is. We all eat a lot of the same foods. A lot of them are prepackaged, a lot of them are just out there and existing. Like, if you ever hit back a Mountain Dew, you've had quite a bit of brominated vegetable oil in your body, which is a flame retardant, which is a known food additive that a lot of other countries say no to.
Right.
And that, like, that's just some of the food additives. You think about the environmental factors that, industry produces. A big spill like just what happened in Ohio. You think about like these really scary things like forever chemicals and these chains of carbon that are just going into us. And this is all reality. But this is all actually happening. It's real. It's actually going to be causing cancer and is causing cancer right now. It's terrifying. So I feel like even if you're super intelligent and some of this other stuff comes your way and just enters your bubble, right? You, I think, are probably more likely to believe something like that because the world feels an awful lot like chaos more and more and more, at least in my experience.
I think it's just because we know more, right? I don't think back in the day when you didn't know anything about anything because you worked on a farm and you knew a lot about your own farm and you had a third grade education, you weren't like, hey, does this have brominated vegetable oil in it? Like,
why is it so cloudy?
Yeah,
All right.
That's weird. Maybe I shouldn't burn things in my house to heat it up and inhale all the smoke.
It was more like the milk is bad on my farm. I don't like my neighbor. Got to be a bitch.
The end.
Yeah.
We should burn her alive just to check.
Just to be safe. Just to be rational.
Dunk her in water. If
this
she floats,
I did notice that the little girl across the street walked across these 3 fields, and now 2 years later, those 3 fields are dead. So we should probably drown her with stones.
Again, for like the greater good. Just
right for the
But this is something that I always love pointing out, and I love where we're going to this space. It's not that there are more skeletons in the closet, right? It's just that now people have flashlights. Or there's a light in the closet, and that can be very terrifying.
Oh, I love that one. Stealing that.
It's the world in which we've all lived, everybody listening to this show. And this is regardless of socioeconomic circumstances. This is simply reality as it exists. But I have a question that I wanted to ask. Okay, it's been on my mind since we started this conversation. Is it easier now to cover something up than it was in the past?
I doubt it.
Doubt it.
I
You
don't
think
know.
it's more difficult?
I think back in the day, you probably could just say, hey, don't tell anyone. And the government would go, yeah, especially women. Right. And then all the guys would light up a cigar and have a drink in the office like
Top
Mad Men.
secret.
And then it's like, oh, yeah, OK, whatever. Who cares if a bunch of poor people die? Now you've got Freedom of Information Act and you've got these huge offices and bureaucracies where somebody's like, wait a minute, that certainly sounds illegal. You're going to do like you couldn't. I don't think you could do the Tuskegee experiments again and be like, let's give this minority group a bunch of syphilis or another deadly disease. Like maybe, hey, let's try a eugenics program. Don't say anything about this. Nah, I don't think so. We've seen this movie before, and marginalized communities especially are on high alert for this. And not to go down too far down this road, but we know that African Americans have lower vaccination rates, and it's not because they're undereducated or they don't know anybody. It's because in the past the government has given them diseases deliberately. And so, yeah, Nicki Minaj tweets it out and people are like, well, I'm not touching that shit, right? And it's not because of Nicki Minaj. It's because of the Tuskegee experiments. And the government saying it was, or the St. Louis thing, and the government saying, oh, it's for the greater good if we just poison all these poor people. They probably won't get poisoned, but if they do, thank God it's just a bunch of black people living in housing in St. Louis. Like, that's what they're really thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, it's also because there was this really scary existential thing that was happening, right? This pandemic that was occurring, and then the government, working way faster than they ever have in conjunction with private corporations, developed all these vaccines real quick and somehow convinced the majority of the population to be like, yeah, I want that. Give me that. No, I don't care that you're making it. Just give it to me. Give it to me now. I need two, and it was because we were so scared. And it's that heightened level of fear that's often abused and used by people who stand in those upper echelons of power. I mean, really, really think, like, for my money, that's when big changes occur, when there's a ton of existential fear in some part of the world. And I've only experienced it really in the United States, but then a huge shift in policy is able to occur because of that fear.
That's okay. So maybe a better way to phrase the question then is it easier to conspire without consequence? Like, I'm thinking, okay, so there's this thing called Let's Start a Coup, this show about Smedley Butler and the business plot. And in the 1930s, this guy came to Congress and was like, hey, I can prove it. There's a bunch of rich people who are trying to overthrow the government. And that this was kind of squashed. Or it's my belief that it was kind of squashed. And people learned about it only later in retrospect. And then you have other stuff where now, in an increasingly divided United States, there's a camp of people who are saying, hey, someone tried to overthrow the government quite recently. There's another group of people who are saying, no, you've got the narrative wrong. This was a protest, and protesting is an inherent right. So, like, I guess my question is maybe better phrased not as cover-ups, but in a world where every competing narrative can be treated with the same level of credibility, even if that credibility is not earned, is it not easier to get away without consequence in some of these things? Like, what's going to happen in Norfolk Southern in Ohio? Because right now, I think the answer is pretty much nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all you'd have to do to put that out of a lot of people's minds is shoot down, 4 or 5 UFOs and like make a big deal out of it publicly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now
There you
people
go.
are like, the U.S. is shooting down UFOs now? Like, what happened in Ohio?
I mean,
that's like
that. I love that during COVID. When the United States government came out, was like, oh, and crazy week, everybody. Am I right? By the way, aliens, maybe. All right.
Yeah, I remember that. But anyway, pandemic though.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it was like, yeah, we have all these evidence, and people are like, this is them warming us up to accept that aliens are real. They don't want to dump it all on us at once. There's conspiracy theories about how they're delivering the conspiracy theory. I'd love to talk about how we can tell a conspiracy theory from factual evidence, because many people seem to have a lot of trouble with this. And fake factual evidence online makes this 100 times harder. But are there rules of thumb where it's like, okay, I heard this thing. How do I know if it's really a new thing or if it's just a bunch of BS from crazy Uncle Frank?
Yeah. Okay. Matt, you and I may have to double dragon this, because there are a couple of things. The first one is pretty boring, which is you have to figure out Uncle Frank's source, right?
Okay.
And Uncle Frank's source is it may be legitimate, right? Like, what is the credibility of that? Bonus points if you find another source that disagrees, and compare the two and attempt to sort of triangulate, the truth. I think that's one of the biggest things is the source. If the primary source appears to have a horse in the race, then, they clearly have an agenda. That doesn't mean that they're not telling the truth, but that means there's a reason for their statement other than transparency, perhaps. That's one way to look at it. But I would say also, if they're linked with other things that are kind of proven conspiracies, like if you say, for instance, to take food examples, right? If you say, hey, the U.S. has a big problem with dangerous additives to food, that's true. But then if it's comma, as proven by, the blood rights of insert politician here, then that's kind of a flag. I would say that's a red flag. I don't know, Matt. What about you? I think sources and seeing if it's related to other disprovable things, those are two big tools.
Well, I feel like it's changed, and my calculus has even altered a bit. But for me, when we started the show 2009, 2010, we were making videos. It used to be, how many different outlets are reporting on this? Are those outlets all within the US? Are there some international outlets that also are talking about this? And what are the reputations of those outlets? You kind of do a little math there, figure out, okay, where are they getting their original source from? Is it an AP article that went out? Is it an official, press release that some company put out? Where's that initial thing coming? Where's that initial piece of information coming from? And comparing what is it we used to do, Ben? It was comparing the phrasings from those different outlets, especially if you've got far left and far right outlets. You compare the phrasings and how it's being talked about and how it's being portrayed, right? What angle are they looking at it from? And then try and find yourself somewhere in the middle of those things. If it's just a soundbite or a headline or a TikTok video, good luck, because you either have to disregard it completely or hunt it down to prove that it's real. And that's just the way it is right now. You can't just accept it. Even if you've got, I guess you just trust your sources. You trust your Jordan Harbingers, your stuff they don't want you to know. You have to make that choice by evaluating their past or the work that you've seen in the past. It just stinks. Yeah, go ahead.
It does stink. I wonder if there's sort of self-defense for not falling down the rabbit hole, because I think, we talk about the YouTube algorithm where somebody is searching for science videos on SpaceX rockets. And then the next one is, how do they launch SpaceX rockets if the Earth is flat? Is the Earth really flat? And then it's like, flat Earth, the Earth is flat, everything is a lie. And you're like, whoa, I went to lunch, left YouTube playing, and I come back, and 3 videos later, 10 videos later, I'm watching some neckbeard tell me that gravity's not real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is something that becomes increasingly challenging, right? And a big part of it is that the primary sources for news are doing the things that primary sources of information have always done. They want to keep you looking at them. You know what I mean? Very, very much they love attention, right? Who doesn't? But the issue is now the calculus is not, are we telling the most true thing? It's, are we telling the thing that will keep the people, their mental butts in the seats? So we have to be aware of that, and it can be it's a tall milkshake, man, because I've been in the exact situation you're describing where I thought, oh, I'll just leave autoplay on, and I started on a really good TikTok. A really good TED Talk, excuse me. I started on a pretty good TED Talk about, corvids or something. I went to get the mail. I came back, and now there's this guy who's telling you that he's part bird and will prove it in his next video. Smash that subscribe button. Like that kind of stuff, I think it is incentivized, right? It is incentivized over nuance. The 3-minute breathless headline version of a like, there's the emphasis on short video, right? Instead of, let's say, the 23 or 2-hour conversation or lecture by somebody who might, she or he or they might be very stodgy in their presentation, but they're literally the person who knows what they're talking about. You know what I mean? Like that, it requires a heavier investment of time, at least the way people see it. And it doesn't automatically give you that dopamine rush. Another thing you could do if you're trying to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff, right? Of a wild conspiracy claim or something that has a little bit more heft to it is to kind of self-evaluate, right? Ask seems if it seems designed to incite an emotion. What emotion is it and why? And we see this all the time in political reporting, right? Somebody says, "Oh, I think blah 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 is not a good plan," and the headline is like so and so excoriates or slams, or
Yeah.
like just whatever angriest word you can have, right? And that's because that headline is meant to make somebody react. So I think headlines are a big key of that. I'm trying to think of little simple things you can do, because I know it stinks to give all of us the homework of saying, if you hear something in a 1 minute video, go find
Right.
a 2 hour lecture on it.
Right. Yeah. What is that called? That concept where the original sort of phrase is that a lie is halfway around the world before the truth gets its shoes on. And
Yes.
I think there's a name for the fallacy, right? It's called like the fire hose or something, where like you have to, if you say a piece of disinformation or misinformation, it might take me 20 minutes to debunk it, but it took you a minute to utter this ridiculous falsehood. And you can utter falsehoods infinitely more and faster than I can debunk those falsehoods. And so that's the path of least resistance and why people fall down these rabbit holes.
Good conspiracies like jazz, right? You can make a painstaking symphony of the truth, but then somebody could just come around and, have a nice little run, add some other stuff.
Well, and this has been weaponized against the American voting public before. We've seen it. We know that bots have been utilized on social media to do exactly what you're talking about, Jordan. Muddy the waters. Just muddy the waters enough to where there are questions. And the takeaway from a voter is, I don't know how I feel about that Hillary Clinton. I don't know. I heard a lot of things. Like that's all it takes to alter in some small way an election.
What does believing in conspiracies do for the believer? You touched on this earlier. There is a status bump. There's a tribalism bump. Can you get into this a little bit? Because I think a lot of people go, why bother believing in this? I get it if you feel marginalized or whatever, but what else is going on here? There are reasons people glom onto this stuff. Like we at the top of the show, I think we talked about lack of control in your life being a reason these are attractive, but there's also a reason that they're addicting.
Yeah. Oh, it's Ben, I'm going to set you up for this. For me, and my understanding of it, I believe that it's having information that makes you feel like you know more than other people who are around you, and that at all times you can be, Ben, how did you put it, the light bringer to those people, like very Luciferian in a way. That's it, Promethean. I've seen that in action, where someone who truly believes, has a lot of information that they believe is true about very specific conspiracy theories, and just wants to tell everybody else about that specific thing, as in, I've got this special stuff that you need to know too, but I'm the one who knows it. I'm going to tell it to you.
Yeah, people like to teach. So I think I think Matt and Noel and I all agree that there's something that happens with conspiratorial thought there. You get the added, not just the status bump of belonging to a community and being approved of by those you would consider your peers, but you also get the feeling of being one who is influential in that group, one who is moving that group in some certain direction by the power of your mind, right? And that's also why we see people, this happened a lot with QAnon, right? And especially when COVID had a lot of people inside, we saw people who were kind of building their own social pyramids, and they were at the top. And so this sunk cost comes along, right? Where you say, oh, I'm at the top of this thing now, so it must be true, right? Even if it sounds a little crazy. There was a great example our buddy Noel brought of the, we're all reading about this, but I think it really spoke to him. In Canada, there was and is a lady who was called the QAnon queen, or the queen of QAnon.
Yeah. I've heard of this person. Isn't she currently like on the run with arrest warrants out or something for, I don't know, giving medical advice? Some weird crap like this.
Not every path runs smooth, right? So, so she, this person was being venerated, right? And by their followers. And so if you have that veneration, you have a shot at that, or you get closer to that inner circle there, then, everything about that experience is telling you that you are on the right path, right? And I think this is a very appealing thing. And then also the point we don't talk about all the time is that just the way that people in power would weaponize anti-Semitism, right? Or any kind of conspiratorial stuff toward an oppressed group, they weaponize that for profit, for resources, for land, right? For further power. And in this world, in this era, rather, we see the same thing happening. Alex Jones wants to tell you stuff before and after he tries to sell you on a thing. So part of the reason he's telling you the thing is not like unrelated ads, right? He's telling you that there is an economic collapse imminent because he wants you to buy gold bars, and he gets a cut of that. So I think weaponizing profit has occurred as well. And so for some people, it's very easy to be just cynically pursuing a profit.
But there's a flip side to that too, and we've already kind of touched on it. Sometimes believing in conspiracies is about protecting yourself and your family from dangers and looming harm out there, whether it's from a government or corporations, an environment, whatever these things are. I'm just, if you believe in the fluoridation of water conspiracy, usually the people who believe in that is because they're worried about feeding their child tap water, or they're worried about ingesting tap water because there have in the past been a lot of contaminants. There have been major lawsuits against chemical companies because of stuff that leaches into the groundwater, and then people drink, they get super sick. Like, there's something about self-preservation and protection and defense when people believe in conspiracy theories, because nobody likes being made a fool, and nobody likes, being in potential harm when they could be protecting themselves potentially.
The element of status, that makes sense. The element of self-esteem, the grifter element. Also, and pardon me if you touched on this, but the tribalism and community element, where I think a lot of the flat earth guys kind of fall into this, where you can tell that, yes, they're making some money from their books. Yes, they're selling some flat earth t-shirts, but really the status is part of it. Yeah, they're getting, their neck beard stroked. But also, a lot of them are probably kooky in other areas, and maybe they don't have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and maybe they don't have family that talks to them anymore, and they don't have kids. They're not married. So a lot of this is kind of all they have is this thing, and they go to all the conventions because that's where their homies are. And we can't really overlook that. If we're in a cliches about the social media in internet age making us less social with one another, maybe this just happens to be the thing. Like, if that guy got into radio controlled airplanes, maybe he wouldn't give a shit about flat earth anymore, because he would have fun doing something else and just not care, find a more suitable community that it gives him a little bit more excitement.
I think that's a great point, up until the guy who's the big wheel, or whomever is the big deal in this radio-controlled hobbyist community, says, also chemtrails, you guys. And
I like radio-controlled planes because they don't drop chemtrails, which I made another video about that. You can look at it. Here's my channel. But anyway, here's my review. Right.
I love that point, though, because like you see that people want to hang out with folks with whom they have things in common, but then also you see that people want to have things in common with folks that they like. And that's where I think, because the two, and this is just
interesting,
me spitballing, I think the two are very true, right? For just my opinion. And maybe I'm maladjusted. You know what I mean? Your mileage may vary.
Well, that's a given. But I don't think that's why you think that, or how you've come to that conclusion. Right. I think that one might be accurate. Those two things can both be correct at the same time. There are different types of people here as well, like true believers versus grifters, right? Alex Jones, maybe he's a true believer, but he's also a grifter, right? He's selling you the like man hormones and the gold bars and the colloidal silver to cure COVID in one shot. Marjorie Taylor Greene, probably a true believer, just believes a lot of stupid crap, always kind of believed a lot of stupid crap according to people that know her. And then later goes, "Ooh, I was misinformed on the Jewish space lasers. My bad." And then just goes on to the next dumb thing.
Right.
In many ways. Who do we see? Who else do we see? Like, we see some real sort of pure grifters who clearly don't believe. I can't name any, unfortunately. I don't know if you can. Who just literally don't care at all with whether the thing they're saying is true. They're only trying to sell you the T-shirt or the cure.
Matt, I'm going to set you up for this because I always like to think that there are a lot of people who maybe started grifting, right, or started as true believers, and along the way their path diverged. And some people seem to have started just maybe with cynical aspirations of some sort, but they were so continually reinforced that they decided, based on the approval they were getting, their ideas must be true. It reminds me of, since we quoted Mark Twain earlier, with a lie getting halfway around the world, let's go with a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. When the Yankee goes back in time and sees Arthur and Guinevere, Merlin and the whole thing, he realizes, he's like, oh, Merlin is a freaking con artist. But Merlin now believes he has magic powers because everybody's just been agreeing that he does. So I think sometimes people fall into that true believer aspect. As far as folks who are out and out grifters, you will have an Alex Jones like character who does say, we're not misquoting him, does say that I consider myself a performer. When he finds himself in a court of law, he will say this is a performance, right? I don't know, Matt. Like I'm trying to think of just solid grifters without dunking too hard on cult leaders who I don't believe by their own stories.
Well, I'll dunk for you. I don't know how hard it's going to be, but look, man, televangelists.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
I mean,
yeah, that's
like,
a good one.
just in
Prosperity
general,
theology.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen so much of that.
Who's the guy who is it? Kenneth Copeland, who's like, I can't fly commercial because there's demons on the plane.
I think
so
that
he needs
was
a jet.
There's also Creflo Dollar.
Oh Lord,
what? That's Creflo Dollar.
That's an Atlanta thing, I believe. Yeah,
that sounds like a rapper.
Yeah. He's got some good planes. He's got some really cool planes.
I like how we're both like, yeah.
But like Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, I mean, there's all kinds of people like that are pushing. It's not necessarily conspiracy theories or anything like that, but there's, they're salespeople, right? And in the end, that just creeps me out a whole lot, because the people in the audience, people who are watching, who are really believing, who are following along and like wanting to give their money because they think it's the right thing to do, it's going to help them and benefit them, they're just being taken advantage of. And it does feel like there's quite a bit of that with the conspiracy theory world. I think that's why we so badly want people to use the kind of critical thinking approach to these things. Like, really, I mean, you got to acknowledge some things, right? Maybe I don't know everything. Maybe some of the stuff I think I know is wrong, but it doesn't mean I have to believe everything that's posted on this message board,
What causes some theories to catch on versus other theories that die on the vine? Why is the Democrats drinking blood of children for adrenochrome? Why does that catch on, but other stuff you'd never hear about it unless you're on 4chan?
This is where I think conspiracy theories and Western philosophy about psychotherapy really collides, because it's about what is real, like what is real for sure, versus what feels real, right? So how do I feel about something and how is something? And I think the conspiracy theories that we get into really are about what feels right to me personally, right?
What does this story say about the story I tell myself, right? About my identity, right? Everybody's the main character. So how does this information relate to my vision of me?
Yeah, and if you've got a group of people who have been demonized enough by any other side or whatever, if you're talking about the political right and using their media outlets versus the political left in their media outlets, and they're fighting each other basically, and it's only kind of a stage play for everyone really involved. It's all the same government. Everybody's shaking hands once they get into Congress. But on the outside, from the observer's perspective, the audience, it seems like they're bitter enemies, and they will be. And if you're on one side, then you got to hate the other side. And if you hate that other side enough and they're the enemy, well, then they probably do the worst thing you can think of. And if someone tells you that they do the worst thing that you can imagine, like eating a baby, drinking blood, doing all of that kind of horrible stuff, you're way more likely to believe it. And if you're more likely to believe it, if you are more likely to believe it as an individual, I guarantee you that kind of thing is going to catch on. And then once it runs wild, what do you do to put that fire out? How could you put that fire out? Because it's already true for them now.
Yeah, the story needs a villain, right? There needs to be a villain. That villain needs to be different from you and your in group, right? There's a reason that you don't, like, most people aren't billionaires, right? That's a very easy group to pick. It's a powerful group, very small population, and given the desire, a billionaire could actually do some pretty significant things on the planet, and some have done. So you have the villain who is not you. This informs the story of yourself. It also gives you a call to action. That's another huge thing about a good conspiracy theory. Like Matt was saying, I've learned of this danger. It's present. It's clear. I also walk away with ideas of what I should be doing. And sometimes that's stuff that's innocuous and harmless. Sometimes it's saying, hey, I'll change part of my diet, right? That's not hurting anybody. That's totally fine. That may in fact be, well, I don't want to go that far, because sometimes they're like, add this crazy stuff to your food. But, That's relatively innocuous. But then that's also, that call to action is the same thing that has people in pizza parlors with firearms, right? Threatening a guy who probably already doesn't like his job.
Yeah, that's yeah. Well, if you work at a pizza place, I can understand why the last straw for you might be the guy coming in with a gun and asking where the secret basement is.
Right.
But it has ping pong, guys. Come on.
There's so much more we could talk about: UFOs and TikTok and secret societies, and you mentioned thought-terminating cliches and coups and takeovers. I mean, there's so much in the book as well, but I know we're sort of out of time. Guys, thank you so much. I usually don't do this, but tell people where to find you, because if they're into conspiracies, they're gonna want to know where to find the straight dope on all that.
Oh, shucks. Well, you can find Matt, Noel, and myself at our show, Stuff They Don't Want You to Know. It's some variation of conspiracy stuff or conspiracy stuff show on TikTok. Oh, wait, TikTok. After all, we've done it on Instagram and so on. We've got a YouTube page, of course, and Matt, what are we doing?
I just want to say thanks for having us on, Jordan. We had a really great conversation with you on our show. Gosh, that was a while back. I think September of last year. But just appreciate you having us on, and it's really great talking with you again.
And likewise, check out Jordan's episode on our show. It's absolute privilege, man.
It's titled "Who's Hiding the Broccoli?"
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Hiding that broccoli. Guys, thank you very much. Thanks for checking out this entire episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show. If you're interested in exploring this topic further, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There, we dive even deeper on this and many other topics. In the audio podcast, I also close open loops, cover things discussed off camera, off air, and give some parting lessons from our guest. You can find The Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any podcast app, or at jordanharbinger.com. And also, if you found this episode useful, please share it with those you care about. Last but not least, like, comment, and subscribe.